Sorry, I'm not going to do the whole show from here. In a minute, I'm going to go over there. How's everyone doing? You all right? Yeah. Lovely. That's very polite. What I love about that is that when you ask how people are at the beginning of a show, everyone's always well. It's lovely. It's very affirming. Some of you are liars. Is anyone not well? Very hot. Very hot. Oh, that's not going to go away.
I've got sinusitis.
Oh dear. Thanks for sharing. I mean, sharing in, you know what I mean. Are you taking anything for that?
Yes.
Oh, good. The reason I ask is that habitually I just carry around quite a lot of medication. And it might come in useful, I don't know. Well, the first thing that's come out of the bag is Galpharm diarrhea relief. So if anyone needs that, you probably shouldn't have come. Oh, I've got some hand sanitizer here. So quite a lot of this show is about viruses and disease and like the spread of infection and so on. So I thought it just might be quite useful to pass this round. Yeah, do use it. It's not much use otherwise. I think there's another one in here. Yeah, we'll send that around that way. What you realise about using hand sanitizer quite quickly during this process is that it is useless, isn't it? Because you take the bottle in your unsanitized hand, then you sanitize your hands, then you retake the bottle, and then you pass it on. So keep passing it round. What else have we got? There's my, it's a little bit of a sort of time lag. There's my inhaler, it's covered in hand sanitizer, so just be warned. Dry eye spray mist. Has anyone, have you come across this stuff?
Yeah.
It's lovely, this stuff. I use it quite often on aeroplanes, you know, that kind of dry, recycled air. You just spray a little bit in your eyes. It gives you this kind of spring morning quality. It does make it look a little bit like you just started to cry. I used some of this on an aeroplane recently, actually, and so this sort of streaming down my face, and the woman next to me tapped me on the arm, gave me this look of tremendous concern, and said, Are you all right? Yeah, I said, even though at that moment, actually, I wasn't. So there's plenty of, I won't itemise it all in detail. A pair of tweezers there, I suppose that's more, I don't know what that is. There's a sort of potluck one there. Might be Sudafed, might be LSD. Anyone prepared to give it a try? So basically, if anyone isn't feeling well, just help yourselves. Like at any point in the show, that'll be fine. Could you do me a favour? Don't worry, you look very alarmed. It's just a little thing. Can you ask me how I am? Terrible. I pulled a muscle in my back a few weeks ago, and I went to see a physiotherapist who's given me all of these exercises to do, as a result of which I pulled something in my shoulder. And like this hip just is really achy, and my asthma's playing up a little bit at the moment, and I think I probably haven't had enough sleep this month. And we're only 2/3 of the way through the festival, even though we've been here since like 1964. So I'm just feeling frankly worn out. And there's the additional pressure of having some people in to film the show today, so you better be a fucking good audience. That's all I've got to say on the subject. And everything's just a bit shit at the moment, isn't it? Like, I'm fine, basically. Physically, I'm a bit of a wreck, but I'm fine. I'm a white European. Everything's all right. I'm basically a perfect storm of privilege, even though I'm from Middlesbrough. But you're not a white European. You're fucked, aren't you, basically? And so, you know, that's a shame. That's been playing on my mind. And then I became obsessed with diseases and sickness, and that doesn't make you feel better. And in the interests of a full disclosure, a friend of mine died about a year ago, and I just haven't really given myself enough time to grieve. But yeah, apart from all of that, I'm really well. Thank you for asking. Maybe I should get on with the story, eh? It's not about me. It's about you. You in the story are a man, mid to late 30s, mid-30s, northern accent, northeastern to be precise, Middlesbrough, for those with a very keen ear, although now you live in Leeds. I'll do my best to stand in for you. You're on an aeroplane from Kampala, Uganda, to London's Heathrow Airport. You're watching an in-flight movie, which is a kind of schlocky thing about an outbreak of disease around the world. Everyone in the movie is getting very exercised about this monkey that's escaped from a lab. Then they almost catch the monkey, but the monkey bites a vet. The hero's wife, who is a vet, vomits. The hero's wife has a seizure. The hero's wife dies. And then you notice that your eyes are bone dry and itchy, so you dig around in your bag for the eye spray and dose liberally. The person next to you taps you on the arm. Take a look at the person next to you now. This is a young woman, late 20s, long dark hair, wearing one of those weird sort of onesies that people only really wear in the privacy of their own home or on long-haul aeroplane flights. And you're a bit worried she's going to say something about allergies and make you put away the bag of nuts you're currently eating. But in fact, what she does is tap you on the arm, point at your eyes, and with this look of great concern, she says, "Are you all right?" "Yeah," you say, even though at this moment, actually you're not. And you're alone with that thought for a moment, and you're a little bit worried that you might suddenly start to actually cry when you notice that this woman is watching exactly the same film as you. What are the chances? So, as a desperate bid to change the subject, you just say, "Enjoying the film?" She nods seriously. "It's very realistic," she says. You offer her a nut, and she takes 7. And it's at this moment that you notice that you find her really very attractive. Take another look at the person next to you. You don't really know what to say under these circumstances, especially given the whole onesie situation. So what you do is you offer her another nut. And what she does is she bursts into tears. Now, secretly, you're actually kind of delighted by this turn of events. Because you can comfort her, right? And she'll be grateful to you for your concern and solicitation, and she won't think you're some Neanderthal who's only after one thing. This won't be at all creepy. You turn and look at her again and meet her eye. She turns to you and meets your eye, and she says, "I'm just going to finish watching the film if you don't mind." Bollocks. You finish watching the film as well. They catch the guilty monkey, the one that bit the vet that was the hero's wife that gave her the disease that started this whole situation. And then a scientist with a test tube slices up the monkey and uses its blood to manufacture a serum which she then distributes around the world really surprisingly quickly. And everyone in the world gets better and everything's all right, and that's the end of the film. This woman next to you is really crying now. Tears are flooding down her face. "Are you all right?" you say. "I was fine. When I started, I felt fine," she says. "But now I actually feel dreadful." The stewardess comes round and scoops up a huge pile of tissues, replacing them with another wedge. "What's on your mind?" you say. "What are you thinking about?" "I was just thinking about that film we were both watching. It was so sad when the monkey died." The stewardess brings round everyone's meals, rubbing her eyes as she hands out the chicken curry. And when she comes back round with the tea and coffee, her eyes are gently streaming with tears. She doesn't bring round any more tissues, so this woman next to you, who now you've learned is called Layla, she goes off to the bathroom to get some for herself. And it's at that moment that you notice the person on the other side of you. Take a look at the person on the other side of you. This is a man, late 40s, maybe early 50s, terrible choice of tie, but what's really important about him is that he's crying. And notice the people in the bank of seats beyond him. They're all crying. And look the other way at the people in the bank of seats that side. All crying. This woman Layla is coming back from the bathroom now with tears flooding down her face and mascara and snot. You drop your bag of nuts on the floor and pretend to be asleep. The noise in the plane builds. Sobbing. Wailing. Howling. Everyone on this aeroplane is flooding with tears, except you. It's Monday evening. You've been in the country less than 2 hours, and you're in a Whitehall office trying to persuade a senior British public health official of the need to take some very urgent action. It's not going very well. Oh, you're not me, and you're not that guy anymore. You're female now, and Indian. If either of these things weren't true, you'd probably be getting a slightly more sympathetic hearing from this senior British public health official. A bit more about you. Northern accent? Northeastern, to be precise. Manipur, for those with a very keen ear, although now you live in Mumbai. I'll do my best to stand in for you. And you're in this Whitehall office because of a massive online sensation you witnessed this weekend. And its weird tangential connection to an unpublished bit of research from your PhD 12 years ago. Early on Saturday morning, midway through your third coffee, and desperately trying to muster enough consciousness to start some work, a photograph was retweeted into your timeline of an aeroplane full of weeping passengers. A really arresting image. 40 or 50 of them in various degrees of focus, all of them at a heightened point of emotional distress. It really woke you up. The poor buggers. So for the rest of Saturday, you followed #weepers, veering between horrible anxiety at all of the photographs and videos and interviews that you won't be able to unsee, and a sort of professional excitement. Could there be a connection to that unpublished bit of research from your PhD 12 years ago? Having started crying on Friday evening, they were still at it, apparently, on Sunday afternoon, when one of them, a guy called Wanbale Peters, blinded by tears, stepped out in front of a London bus. He was killed instantly. And hashtag RIP Wanbale trended globally. This was the final push you needed to make a phone call to your friend Alexandra, who's deputy to the senior British public health official directly opposite you. Take a look at the person opposite you. This is that senior British public health official. So smooth, he looks like he's been polished. And to the left of him is your old friend Alexandra. This is a friend from university. So that means that this face looks like a face you used to know as well as your own, but someone then just did some crossing out on the forehead. It seems likely that it's spread by some form of pathogen, you're telling him. But whether it's viral, bacterial, possibly even parasitic, it's impossible to say without further research. But I have seen this before. 12 years ago in Kibale Forest, Uganda, not far from where this flight took off, I saw cases of weeping, apparently spread by contact. I'm sorry, he says. Would you mind speaking a little bit more slowly? I'm just having a bit of trouble understanding your accent. It seems likely that it is spread by some form of, listen, anatha. Actually, it's anahitha, listen. If we declare that this is a disease, there'll be panic. In the absence of evidence, we much prefer the view that this phenomenon is merely hysterical. It spreads. And as far as we can tell, it continues indefinitely. That's not normal weeping. Well, no. It's hysterical. As I understand it, people are simply overreacting to the global situation. And as far as I know, the worst thing that can happen is that people have to go into work crying. Well, that's probably all right, isn't it? I think we need to keep our rhetoric toned down. The cases I saw in Kibale Forest were severely debilitating, often to the point of incapacity. Yes, well, they're more emotional than us, aren't they? There's a pause. He really did just say that. You look over at Alex, who gives you a sort of apologetic. You consider asking him who us represents exactly in that last sentence. But instead you say, so you're prepared to let this spread until everyone in the country is weeping? What will your newspapers say about that? There's another pause. You realise later that he's understood this to be a threat. Of course, I'm not saying that there should be no tests. We have to keep our bases covered. So you'll give me access to resources. Another pause. You'll have to go through security clearance. You'll have to sign the Official Secrets Act. And in the absence of evidence, the line is that these tests are purely precautionary and that the phenomenon is merely social. People are simply overwrought. Now, Alex, let's get on with thrashing out the public response. What should we call it? I think an individual well-being campaign. You leave Whitehall and head down to Victoria Embankment to try and clear your head. And you catch sight of a woman crying alone by the river. And overhear a gang of boys daring each other to go up and offer her a hanky. When you get back to the hotel, the individual well-being campaign has already begun. The television shows an interview with a government minister discussing his preferred ways of avoiding empathy. So I thought it would be good at this point in the show to just tell you a little bit about how a virus actually works. Is that all right? Yeah, I mean, muted enthusiasm for that one. You haven't really got any choice at this point in the show. Do you recognise this? It's to licorice also. Is that what you thought? You collectively are a cell in the human body, and your perimeter is the membrane, the cell wall, which is covered in receptors, whose job it is to detect anything that comes into contact with the cell and determine if it's something that you recognise, whether it's something that's supposed to be there. You're a cell. One cell. And this, to scale, is a virus. One particle of virus. A virion, it's called, which I think sounds like a character from Game of Thrones. This is so small that it can't be seen with a conventional microscope, and no one even knew it existed until 100 years ago. It's nothing more than a string of DNA wrapped in a protein. It's actually amazing that something so small can cause so much trouble. But it really, really can. Because all it needs to succeed, this little thing, is to have evolved in such a way that when it comes into contact with a receptor on a cell membrane, it'll get a positive answer to the following question. Do you recognise this?
I do.
In which case it will be absorbed into the cell. Don't eat it. You don't know where it's been. And it will be conveyed into the nucleus of the cell, which is the middle. Would you mind awfully conveying it? Thank you. That's beautifully done. The guy yesterday just chucked it. Thank you. And he missed. So now this is too simple and too small to reproduce itself. So what it needs is to hijack your biological machinery and get you to make copies of it. Not quite perfect copies in that case. Which you will do with great adroitness and dexterity. Again and again and again. And all of these copies will be conveyed out of the cell, mind your heads, where they will encounter other cells and be replicated in the same way in those cells until your body is full of licorice all sorts. And you might not notice the presence of these for a while. Certainly you can tolerate the presence of them for a while longer. But after an incubation period, there is going to come a time when you start to think, I don't feel quite right.
It's Tuesday afternoon. You're back home in Leeds, and you're staring at a text message, wondering what to do. You kind of hate the sound of text messages arriving at the moment, ever since the one you got the day after you arrived in Kampala, telling you the news about Jack. This one clearly isn't on a par with that, but it is still really jangling your nerves. It's come from your local hospital, reminding you of your appointment later this afternoon to report for urgent tests. You, and no doubt everyone else who was on that aeroplane, you don't like the sound of tests. It'll involve swabs and jabs and blood samples, and you fucking hate hospitals at the moment. And do you really need to go? You're clearly not suffering from the disease. You're not crying. You're completely emotionally untroubled. You don't need to go for tests. Of course, you're not completely emotionally untroubled. You can't turn on the television without someone you don't even recognise from the aeroplane turning up and bawling their eyes out. Some of them are clearly just banking their 15 minutes. Some of them are probably faking it. Someone else has died, but it is a storm in a teacup. Anyone could have heart failure. You don't need to go for tests. And at least you're not part of the story, eh? At least you're not in any of the photographs or videos. At least no one seems to have mentioned or even noticed the one person on the aeroplane who wasn't crying. Then your next door neighbour Julie turns up at the door with a photograph on her telephone. "Is this you?" she says. You take the phone and feel your throat close up. Me? I don't think so. You think you've probably got away with this. Where's it from? Oh, I saw it on Twitter. It's from that flight on Friday where everyone's crying. What flight on Friday where everyone's crying? You've not seen this. You've been living under a rock. I've been in Uganda, haven't I? Well, that's the point. This was a flight from Uganda. Friday, did you say? I flew back on Saturday. You're not at all sure you've got away with this. Lucky escape, eh? I guess. Are you all right? You seem a bit... Oh, I'm fine. Probably just still a bit jet-lagged. You close the door and watch as Julie walks past the front window, rubbing her eyes. You take a puff of your inhaler and walk straight out of the house. As you walk down the street, your phone buzzes in your pocket. You've got to get that text message sound changed. It's a text from Julie. It says, "It is you in the photograph. I'm crying now. What the fuck is this?" You don't reply. When you reach the bus stop, your phone buzzes again. She's reposted the photograph, tagged you on Twitter, and thrown you to the wolves. On the bus across town, you sit like this. The whole way. On the train north, you continue to sit like this. You really, really wish you had a beard, so that you could shave it off. When you arrive at your mum's, there's a man knocking on her front door. "Hello? Hello, my name's Paul Hillier. I'm from the Daily Mirror. If you'll talk, I think we can guarantee a sympathetic hearing. Your side of the story, you know. My tragic son." You've got to get away from this. You turn around and head for Teesside Airport. So, the rate at which a disease spreads is measured by a number. It's called the R0. If a disease has got an R0 of 1, then each infected person will pass it on average, to how many people do you think? That's the correct answer. Are you an epidemiologist? Each infected person will pass it on to, on average, one other person. If a disease has got an R naught of less than 1, then its spread will gradually diminish. If a disease has got an R naught of more than 1, then it will grow and become epidemic, and something's going to have to be done to stop it. Let's have a disease quiz. I'll name a celebrity disease. And your job is to guess the R naught of that disease. How many people, on average, each infected person will pass it on to. Question 1. Ebola. What do you think is the R naught of the recent Ebola outbreak? 10. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you think? Higher or lower? It is lower. We've got a few higher in the room, but mostly lowers. It's quite a lot lower. It's actually about 2. Just over 2. Ebola isn't as infectious as you think. It's really hard to catch Ebola from someone. You've got to have direct physical contact with someone who's currently showing symptoms of the disease. And you don't show symptoms of the disease for very long, because its fatality rate is incredibly high. So, for example, if I've got it, and I'm showing symptoms, and you're just sitting there, you're probably fine, unless I projectile vomit. If I've got it, and I'm showing symptoms, and then you've probably got it. I mean, don't worry, I don't have Ebola. I wouldn't have come. Question 2. HIV. What do you think is the R naught of HIV?
2.
2 as well. Higher or lower? Higher. It's higher. Yeah, only a little. It's about 3.05. I found that surprising as well, because in order to catch HIV from someone, you need more direct physical contact than is the case with Ebola, but you carry it around for quite a lot longer. Of course, it's an average. Some people pass it on to no one at all. Some people pass it on to loads of people. There was a guy called Gaetan Dugas who, in his rage and frustration at catching the disease, apparently deliberately passed it on to hundreds, even thousands of other people. He's what you'd call a super spreader. Final question, the jackpot. Measles.
5.
5. Higher or lower? Higher. It is higher. The R naught of measles is 18. It's about as high as it gets. Measles has got a few things in its favour. It travels through the air, which makes it easier to spread around. It can survive for a time outside of its host organism, you. And I think this one is the holy grail. You can pass it on before you know you've got it. You're infectious before you're symptomatic. And so for the virus, that's a few more days travelling round on buses and trains and aeroplanes before your host decides to go and isolate themselves by having a long lie down. Measles is the winner in the R naught race so far. So despite the fact that the weeping is clearly spreading, your tests have been, at best, inconclusive. You got samples from more than 90% of the weepers from the original aeroplane and found no evidence of any pathogen. And as it grew and spread throughout the country, you got more samples, but still no evidence of any pathogen. It all starts to lend credence to that theory that the whole thing is merely hysterical. But just because you can't find something doesn't mean it isn't there. So now you're in the Hammersmith flat of one of the original weepers from that aeroplane. A woman called Layla. Long dark hair, wearing a weird sort of onesie. Doesn't look like she could be the super spreader of a major disease. But then who does? I was not one of the first, she says. Or so you think. It's actually quite hard to figure out what she says through all of the tears. It took her 3 goes to successfully offer you a cup of tea. Which of course you had to regretfully decline because you can't very well take off your hazmat suit. I was the first. I'm sorry, you say. I thought you said you weren't one of the first. I wasn't one of the first. I was the first. I was the first person on that aeroplane to start crying. I'm sorry. I started crying about 3 hours into that flight. And I'm still. It turns out she was in Uganda for 4 days to see a cousin get married. You ask her a series of questions about her movements while she was in the country, all of which meet with the same answer. No, she didn't leave the city. No, she didn't attend any parties apart from the wedding. No, she didn't go to any funerals. No, she's not aware of anyone having come from a remote jungle village into the city in order to attend the wedding. No, she didn't encounter any chimpanzees, other primates, any wild animals, or indeed go to a zoo. No to anything that might be potentially useful. You've got 1 question left, and you richly expect it to meet with the same answer. You'll be familiar with these online reports of this guy who apparently wasn't crying. Do you know anything about that? Yeah. He was sitting next to me. He was really creepy. It was horrible on there, and he just pretended to be asleep the whole time, so you had no physical contact with him at all. He wishes. That isn't quite what I... No, nothing. No, wait, yeah. He gave me a nut. You leave her flat and call Alex to get her to try and track this guy down. Then you head into the underground. This individual well-being campaign is everywhere now. In the tube station, they're playing a song, which is essentially just the word happy, over and over and over. When it finishes, they play it again. On the tube train, there's an advert for a newly released film called 4 Weddings and Another Wedding. You get off the train at Covent Garden and there's a warning notice outside ENO's production of Madame Butterfly, which seems a bit moot. You've never known the city to be so quiet. The R0 of this weeping is high. The R0 of panic is higher. Then your phone rings. It's Alex calling to tell you that the guy you're trying to track down has taken a flight to Dubai. But what you really notice is the crack in Alex's voice. What's the matter? You say. Are you crying? I'm sorry we didn't take it seriously sooner, she says. It's everywhere now. What happened? Kevin started crying. I just gave him a hug. And now, where are you? Don't come. Offering comfort, that's what gets you. You're in an Irish pub in Dubai Airport. And you're wondering if you will ever cry. The text message telling you that your onward flight is delayed by an hour just nearly sent you over the edge. But your eyes are still dry. The barman brings you a 3rd pint of Guinness and a bag of nuts. And you stare into the Guinness, waiting for it to settle. Determinedly not thinking about Jack. You like this bar, because there aren't any screens showing anything other than sport. When you landed in Dubai, you went into a cafe, bought a coffee, and you caught sight of a house on a screen. You felt as though you recognised the house on the screen. Then you realised that you recognised the house because it was your house, and it was surrounded by journalists. The caption on the screen read, "Emotionally dead?" question mark. Then a journalist talking to the camera gestured at this throng of reporters and said, "There are extraordinary scenes here, as we witness the incredible media feeding frenzy generated by the discovery of the true identity of Zombie Guy." Then she talked on camera to that guy Paul Hillier from outside your mum's house. "Are there any indications as to why this man might be unable to cry?" "Unable or unwilling," he said. Then an Indian woman came on in the studio, a government scientist of some sort, and said something about needing you to come in urgently for tests. You could start to feel persecuted. "We may be able to learn something from him," she says, "about how to produce immunity. If we are able to stimulate tears, then..." But you don't learn anything else about why she wants to make you cry. Because at that moment you abandoned your coffee, left the cafe, and came into this Irish pub to begin drinking Guinness. In an hour, you're flying onwards to Mumbai, India. You took the first available flight from Teesside, which happened to be for Amsterdam Schiphol. From Amsterdam, you booked yourself onto the first flight somewhere that seemed suitably far away, which was here. And from here, you're booked on to the first flight somewhere that isn't Europe, but for which, if you can get away with using Jack's passport, then there's an existing visa. You think you look enough like him. You'd like to get further than India. Maybe tomorrow. Credit card can take it. Maybe Micronesia. A series of people come up and ask if the other seat at your table is free. You tell them it isn't. In many ways, you feel like you want to cry, but you're fucked if you're going to do it for the benefit of science. You take a deep breath and scroll back through your text messages to find the one from your sister telling you that Jack had died. A fucking text message. Another week and you'd have been able to say goodbye. But go, he'd said. Go to Africa. Go look at the chimpanzees. I'll still be here when you get back, he said. And 2 fucking days later, he died. So he went to look at the chimpanzees anyway, because that's what he would have wanted. And you looked into the eyes of this one chimpanzee, and the fucking thing looked sadder than you did. And remembering that, not Jack, remembering that, you might be about to go, finally. When someone else comes up and asks if this seat is free. Yeah, you say. Do you want a nut? You're standing by the hospital bed of your friend Alex, and she's doing that apologetic look again. I'm sorry for causing all of this fuss, she seems to say. Although, of course, it's hard for her to actually say anything through the tears. And you feel like you'd quite like to cry too. Maybe it would be safe to do so from inside your hazmat suit. But it somehow seems in bad taste to weep for mere grief. "How's it going?" she manages to ask. It's a difficult question to answer. More than half of the UK population is crying now. But in many ways, Alex is an extreme case. For the most part, the weepers in the UK are being looked after. Sufferers sip regularly from a bottle of lightly salted water to stave off dehydration and sodium crisis. And in the absence of pre-existing conditions and complications, the weepers in the UK are doing all right. And most of the people who've managed to avoid contracting the illness by tending to travel in private transport or move in their own circles are people considered important to Britain's ongoing prosperity, which is fortunate. The senior levels of government, business, finance are more or less intact and handling the situation. And so to prevent further spread, there's increasingly strict segregation between weepers and non-weepers. You're the only one of Alex's friends who's been in to see her. "So you're going to go back to India?" she says. You both know that there's been a sudden huge outbreak in your home country, already much worse than it is here. You really should be there. There isn't much by way of healthcare infrastructure. There isn't the same access to clean water, even salt. People lead much more precarious lives, so the prognosis for any individual case is much worse. Yet, you really should be there. And you've totally lost track of this supposed asymptomatic super spreader now. There's no record of where he flew from Dubai. There's no record of him having gone through border control in order to leave the airport. So in the absence of anything new, you're much more use back home. The only thing keeping you here is Alex. She says, "I'll still be here when you get back." There's blood in her tears. Hi. Could you do me a little favour during this next bit? It's worse for me than it is for you. Can I give you this pair of tweezers? And during this next bit, can you just use those to pluck some hair out of my arm? I take full responsibility. Well, as non-violently as you can, I guess. I mean, if you can pluck arm hair in a sort of Gandhian way, that sounds great. But yeah, the idea is it's probably going to hurt a bit, yeah. It's just about 2 paragraphs. No, I mean... Yeah, that's it. Different kinds of tears have got different chemical compositions. So, for example, the kind of tears that your eye produces just to keep itself moist, basal tears, they're called. These are essentially just a chemical called lysosome. suspended in salt water. The kind of tears that your eye produces when it's irritated by an onion, for example, or a bit of grit, or the sight of Ian Duncan Smith. These are chemically very similar to basal tears. The kind of tears your eye produces when you're in pain. These contain a complex cocktail of hormones and natural painkillers, all of which your body produces when it's under stress. Emotional tears, chemically speaking, are virtually identical to tears of pain. In this Mumbai bar, they don't serve Guinness, and what they call a pint is actually just a 330 millilitre bottle. You're on your sixth. Despite the temperature, the man sitting opposite you is wearing gloves, and he notices you staring at his covered hands, returns your gaze for a moment, and then says, "Did you know that in the West African countries affected by the Ebola outbreak, society has totally transformed? People don't even shake hands anymore. Instead, they just touch elbows." And he holds that pose for a time. He seems to expect you to reciprocate in kind. You stare back at him for a moment, and then he says, "But of course, even that wouldn't be safe with you, would it?" You grab your bag and make to run, but he stops you. "Don't go," he says. "We want to help you. The tabloids have had their fun, but we can help turn things around. I've already had a couple of pieces planted in the Telegraph as a gesture of good faith, you know. You didn't do anything that anyone else wouldn't have done." That sort of thing. But now it's your turn to make a gesture of your own. When you do finally reply, it isn't exactly articulate. "The fuck are you talking about?" "I'm from the British government. We want to look after you. We think that you could be very useful. Why don't you come back home with me and talk?" "I don't know what you're talking about. This has got nothing to do with me." You grab your bag and run. You expect him to follow you, to stop you, but instead he just sits and watches as you disappear into the crowds. When you arrive at Heathrow Airport, you've started to cry. The airport security man stops you. "I'm sorry, madam," he says. "We're under strict instructions not to let any weepers aboard any aeroplane." "I'm not sick. I'm just really upset." "Tears are tears, and rules are rules." You explain that you're a scientist working on this phenomenon. But his reply is, "Yeah, and I'm Gary Lineker." You understand that there's some sarcasm at work here, but you don't get the reference. So your reply to him is, "Here's my documentation, Mr. Lineker." He laughs at you as though, and then starts dealing with the next customer as though you've become invisible. You make a series of phone calls to Whitehall to try and get yourself cleared for departure, but they just keep saying, "Call off the search." "I just want to go home," you say. But they keep saying, "Call off the search." They seem convinced that the man you were looking for has taken a flight to India and that you're following him there. "I just want to go home," you say. And this series of conversations, with the series of white men with identical voices is so irritating that it's 5 minutes before you notice that you've stopped crying. So you attempt to board another flight. But Gary Lineker has earmarked you as a weeper. And the fact that you're manifestly not crying does nothing to change his mind. He suggests that you might have used science to hide the tears, which you point out would constitute a miracle cure, would make you rich. You wouldn't very well hide it as though it's some sort of black magic. In desperation, you text Alex, who from her hospital bed manages to pull the appropriate string. Gary Lineker is livid at having been circumvented in this way. And as a sort of petty bureaucratic revenge, he insists that you wear your hazmat suit the whole duration of the flight. This means no food, no drink. You can't even watch an in-flight movie. The plastic screen makes it all blurry. But what's really striking is that there are 10 or 15 other people aboard the flight dressed the same way. The tension aboard the plane is palpable. Take a look at the person to your left, gently rocking to and fro. Take a look at the person to your right, half audibly praying to the baby they're holding. About 3 hours into the flight time, that baby starts to cry. And immediately, there's panic. Accusations, threats of violence. A dozen or more other people burst into tears independently around the plane. The pilot intervenes over the intercom. It looks as though the flight is going to be grounded in Istanbul. But Istanbul, hitherto unaffected by the contagion, refuses to take the flight. So you have to continue to your original destination with everyone around weeping and howling. The cabin crew have long since taken cover. When you land in Mumbai, that baby has stopped crying. And so have most of the other weepers on the plane. A false alarm. Then you get off the plane and find a text message telling you that Alex has died. You're sitting on the terrace of the Hotel Sea Princess, Mumbai, staring at the ocean and eating an expensive meal. You couldn't find a cab from that Mumbai drinking joint, but that was all right because the hotel sent the car.
He stared out of the window at the chaos of the unfamiliar city. Endless honking. Crashed cars. Almost everyone at the hotel is weeping. But you find that easier not to notice here than at home. People just get on and do their jobs. You dropped your bag in your room and came out onto the terrace to order dinner. The sign says, all chefs, non-weepers. Not that that makes any difference to you. You're sitting on the terrace of the Hotel Sea Princess, Mumbai, staring at the ocean and eating an expensive meal. You knew that you should head straight to KEM Hospital to help, but first you had to eat. You'd nothing in the flat, so you went out, but found everywhere closed. Stores had been ransacked. You stepped over a street sleeper, only to realise that he was dead. Puckered. Bluish. In desperation, you headed to one of these flash hotels by Juhu Beach for a meal the price of a cab driver's monthly salary. And here you sit. The only other humanity on the terrace is the back of the head of one white guy staring at the ocean from the table in front of you. He doesn't seem to be crying, so you take off the head of your hazmat suit and feel the breeze cool the heat of the evening. At that moment, your phone rings. Behind you, a phone rings and a woman talks in English. You find her accent quite hard to understand, but you know what she's talking about. It's that scientist woman you saw on television in Dubai airport, and she seems to be talking about you. You could get up and introduce yourself. You'd rather get up and run. But you can't get up at all without her recognising you. So you have to sit and listen to her telling her telephone about your complacency and your smugness and your institutionalised callousness. How can she say all of this? She doesn't know you. She'd never even met you. And how could you have known what would happen? What could you have done? And it's only when you realise that you're crying that you get that she wasn't talking about you at all, but about an entire system of which you're just one particle. Ordinarily, you'd approach someone crying alone in a restaurant. You'd want to know that they're okay. But the new ordinary militates against such compassion. So you move to a more distant table, eat your meal, and watch him weep, and rack, and sob. A waiter takes away his plate and brings out a huge pile of tissues. He wipes his eyes, blows his nose, and anchors a 10 rupee note under a salt cellar. 10 rupees. Then he gets up, turns around, and walks towards the hotel entrance. As he walks by you, he's rubbing his eyes with his arm. You wonder if he's got a nice face. A gust of wind picks up the 10 rupee note from under that salt cellar and brings it drifting on the breeze towards you. Instinctively, you catch it and re-anchor it.
yawn, and rub your eyes. Two minutes later, you burst into tears. Every virus, more or less at random, mutates. And some of these mutations give the virus an advantage that helps it to stay alive and to replicate. You know how I said earlier that measles was the winner of the R0 race? Well, that's sort of nonsense, really, isn't it? Measles isn't the winner. It's not like measles ran faster or worked harder. It's not morally better or more deserving than the other viruses. It's just a mutation that worked out for the best. A series of happy accidents. A fluke. So we talk about fighting disease, about our brave battle against this or that. But that's nonsense too. We're not fighting a battle. We are the battleground. There's an invisible war being fought in all of our bodies, between things that we can't even see. My friend who died, he's not a loser because the disease that killed him happens to have been stronger than his immune system. And like viruses, humans adapt. We adapt to live with viruses. Running around in your body at any one time, there are thousands of viruses. But most of them don't do you any harm because you've adapted to live with them. 8% of the human genome is virus in origin. We all carry around these invisible scars from battles fought centuries ago. But just because our ancestors survived doesn't mean we're somehow winners. You're on an aeroplane from Mumbai, India, to London's Heathrow Airport. You're watching an in-flight movie, which is a kind of schlocky thing set in a happier world than this one. It's unbelievably sad, and there's nothing in your bag that'll help with this. The woman next to you doesn't ask if you're all right. There is no woman next to you. Everyone sits singly. No one brings round tissues. No nuts are offered. But back in Britain, things are apparently stabilising. You'll be looked after there. Apparently that scientist woman has been struck off by the Indian Medical Association for unfairly hounding and persecuting you without evidence, which seems fair enough. She found you in the airport this morning while you were trying to check in. She kept saying, "It's not all about you. Don't look away." It was horrible, with her weeping and howling the whole time. It took 2 security guards to pull her away. But back home, things will be all right. You look out of the window at the disappearing country below. Maybe they'll sort things out in India too, eventually. Everything will be all right.
Everything will be all right. Everything will be all right.